It means so much to our community for you to be here, and not only for that, but for someone like you to just be talking about Israel, defending Israel. As I said to you earlier, you know, if you go on a tour like this, you need to be good at getting a lot of thank yous. And you expressed a little bit of surprise about that. And I said, well, you know, sometimes we don't feel like we have a lot of friends. But you are proving that wrong, and time and again. And so why don't you start by just telling us how that happened? How did you, a young woman in South Africa, you know, discover Israel and fall so in love with her?
Sure. So first of all, thank you very much for having me, and good evening. It's been an interesting last couple of days. Robin's been working me very hard, but it has been such a blessing to meet so many people. I've had a lot of fun. I've been hosted by beautiful people. Unsurprisingly, I am yet to be proven wrong that whenever you're at a Jewish event, there's going to be food, and that holds the same here in the United States as it has, not only in Israel, back at home in South Africa. So, as introduced, my name is Olga Meshoe, and I'm the eldest of 3 children. I'm a Christian, and so part of my love for Israel stems from the fact that I've come to recognize and appreciate and have learned that if it were not for the Jewish people, I would have no faith. But more interestingly has been the influence and the role of my parents in my life. And that is something that I may touch on a little bit later as we have a conversation this evening. So growing up, you know that Israel's there and you're going to pray for Israel and whatever. You don't really have an interest beyond that. But my dad, who's been doing a lot of work concerning Israel and Israeli issues because he's in the South African Parliament, he was on a speaking tour here in the United States, and in particular Canada. And he came home about 3 years ago, very excited and very angry at the same time. And he was like, there's this BDS movement, absolute foolishness, absolute nonsense. And they're taking our history, our analogy of apartheid, and they're putting it across to a people, and a people in particular in Israel, and saying that the very same struggles that we experienced, that we're still experiencing in certain regards, even though it officially came to an end in 1994. And they're saying that Israel is an apartheid state, and it's absolute nonsense, and it can't be. And the way that my household does or works is that if there's something that needs to be done, unless you've got a very good excuse not to do it, you better do something about it. So dad comes home, and we're like, okay, so what does this mean? He was like, well, if there's going to be a response, it needs to come from a people who actually experienced it. It needs to come from South Africa. Because we have a moral authority with regards to that. We experienced it. Nobody can say that they know apartheid as well as we do. So he was like, South Africa needs to respond, and in particular, Black South Africa needs to respond. We're like, okay. And he's like, so the Meshoes need to do something about it. And I remember we're having dinner around the family table, and I was like, Dad, you're really just so busy, because he does a lot of things himself. So he's like, well, we need to do something about it. I'm an attorney by profession, and so I was brought into DEISI as its legal advisor. But one of the things that I've come to appreciate, and thankfully I'm doing better at it than when I was young. When I was young, I used it just for no purposes. I have a mouth, and so more effectively now, I was invited to one event to just speak about Israel. And interestingly enough, it had nothing to do with DEISI. It was to speak about Israel from a political perspective, because politics interests me. And from then on, it just, it's rolled, and I've come to appreciate and acknowledge, it's kind of like a plant, a flower. When you plant it and you water it, what happens? It grows. And so as I do this, my love for Israel grows, because I get a broader understanding. I get to meet incredible people, diverse people like yourselves. And there's a need for truth. And because I know the truth, and because I'm a part of a people who know the truth, we have a responsibility to step up and to say what the truth is. And so that's why I do what I do.
Well, thank you for that. Let's talk about that truth for a second. So I think one of the reasons why there's so many people here tonight, besides the fact that we all love Robin, the work of the CRC, and find her very hard to say no to, is, as I'm sure you've learned as she's run you all over the area over the last few days, but it's because the issue is so timely. And I know the first time that I heard, having lived in Israel for a couple of years, having experienced society there, Israel being labeled as an apartheid state, I was stunned. And by no less than the likes of, a former president of the United States. And so, but I also found that it wasn't so easy to respond. It was such an outrageous claim that it wasn't so easy for me to respond. As we've learned since, we're finding that all over, especially on college campuses in America, but it's very hard. And you bring a perspective, as you said, and that you're willing to share, that is so important. So I wonder if you couldn't maybe tell us a little bit about what it was like being born into apartheid South Africa, and then coming to Israel, this supposed apartheid state, and explain to us how different you found it.
Sure. So, even though I was born during apartheid, I had some experiences, but my parents did a very good job of shielding us from the majority of it. So my experiences, interestingly enough, haven't only been just as a child growing up, but even now in today's day and age. I mentioned the fact that I studied law, so I was a partner before I left, and I remember walking into meetings, and in fact, it still sometimes happens today. And the meeting's about to start, and it's my case, it's my matter, and everybody's like, so where's your boss? And I'm like, I'm the boss, because you're not supposed to be the boss as a young black woman. And part of that reason is, one of the things that apartheid did is that structurally and from a legislative perspective, we were given a different educational system that was deliberately supposed to make us dumb, stupid. We weren't supposed to rise above a particular standard. By law, we could not integrate with people who hadn't been cooked for as long as we had, so they were lighter skinned. There was no marriages that were interracial. We couldn't go to various places within our very own community. I mean, imagine that there's a community literally about 20 meters or 500 meters away from you, but because it's been zoned as a place that non-white people are allowed to go, you couldn't go unless you had permission. So my parents used to carry what was called a dompas. And even if you were going to go work in that particular place, you had to be back home. I mean, you had a curfew by a certain time. They tell us stories of how they would go to a restaurant with friends or with people, and again, because they were black, you couldn't enter into that restaurant. You had to go eat at the back of utensils that were just out of tin. They weren't the same as what everybody ate. And these stories upon stories upon stories about that. One of the more painful ones, just in terms of how, even from a treatment perspective, and yes, this was general. There were some, thank God, some people who were enlightened with regards to the fact that we're all God's children, and we all deserve the right to be treated equally, especially with the majority in that particular nation. But my dad tells a story of when he was with his father at an event, and his father's boss's son was kicking my grandfather, so my dad's dad, was kicking him. He must have been 6 years old. And my granddad could do nothing about it. And my dad watched his father pretty much being physically abused, and also then listening to his father plead with a 6-year-old boy, say, "We need a duni, klein boss. We need a duni," which means, please don't hit me, small boss. I mean, how do you observe your father being treated like that? So, one of the reasons why I do think that a lot of people, including my own country and specifically the young people in my country, have become very passionate with supporting the BDS, is because of how wicked apartheid was. Nobody wants to see, I believe, nobody wants to see that happen again elsewhere. Even though it's been 22 years after democracy, it's still quite raw. And so when you say apartheid, you conjure up these emotions in people, and so they immediately are up, prepared to fight. But unfortunately, they're prepared to do that based on absolute ignorance. So here are these people who, because they seemingly are doing better, because of what the media tells us and the bias that happens in United Nations and things that you very well know, here are these people that are treating others as badly as we were treated. So how dare they? So of course, people are going to get up and get upset and raise their voices. But unfortunately, when it gets based on a lie, it's painful. And the painful reality of it is twofold. One, because when you go to Israel, and I've seen this with regards to the groups that we take along, so DEISI in particular is passionate about presenting people the facts, creating platforms of truth so that you can intelligently respond to accusations. I mean, just to stand up and say, Israel's not an apartheid state, and they're like, okay, why? You've got to be able to converse with a person with an understanding. You take them and you let them see certain things that happened in apartheid South Africa that doesn't happen in Israel. The fact that in the Knesset you have representatives that are Israeli, Jewish, and Arabs, Muslims. In hospitals, I mean, there's no distinction. If you need help, you need help. On public transportation, we weren't allowed to be on the same, transport systems as white people were. So they see all of these things and they speak to people on the ground, our students as well as other people that we take across, and they're like, but hang on. They're integrated, they're having conversations, they're friendly with each other. Yes, there's issues, and yes, people moan and they groan about government, but who doesn't? I mean, I've had the opportunity to spend a couple of days with you, and you have your own views about your own government and your own potential presidential candidates. Praying for America. So you see all of that, but then they're like, but wait, this isn't what we experienced, and still at times are experiencing. Unfortunately, in certain parts of South Africa, racism is still rife. But also, this isn't what our parents went through. There aren't laws that divide you and distinguish where you need to be and how. And so it hurts. It hurts because they've been deceived and they've been told a lie, and in certain instances made a puppet. You're fed all of this information and propaganda, and so when they say that they need a people that are going to rise up for a cause and go and toy in the streets, I don't know if the South Africans remember that terminology, protest in the street. But meanwhile, when you investigate what the true facts are, you're like, actually guys, it's not true, and it's not fair, and it's not right. And so what it does is, not only does it cause a pain now to say, but you're using us, it also trivializes what our parents went through, what we went through. Frankly, if what apartheid South Africa was, what Israel is today, there would have been no need for a struggle. Nelson Mandela would not be known for what he's known today. It just wouldn't have happened. So we need to, those of us that know the truth, those of us that have an understanding with regards to what's going on, and frankly, the complexities that exist. Just by way of an example, as you'll know, one of the things that they say is that this apartheid wall exists, and it separates, and it segregates, and. My sister-in-law, she came with us to the trip, and one of the things that fascinated her, she was like, this apartheid wall is 96% fence. And they were like, yes, that's 96% fence. And the checkpoints that you have, or that they have in Israel, are there for a reason. In my country, in some places, crime is quite rife, and we have blocked communities. And if you're going to enter that community, then, you get checked. But then also, I mean, if the West Bank doesn't identify itself with Israel, when you pass from one country or one territory to another, what do you have to do? What did I have to do when I entered America? I had to produce a passport. So what are the double standards that you're applying? So the discovery of facts, as well as with the knowledge of a history that we went through what we did, those two combined have not only for myself, but for DEISI proved to be quite powerful, and that's what we're hoping to be able to enlighten a lot more people across the world with.
No, that's wonderful, and I can relate, because anytime as Jewish people we hear something, oh, there's a Holocaust happening here or a Holocaust happening, we're very sensitive, even offended, because it feels like it discounts the actual brutality. So I think we can relate to that point very well. But my impression, and you can correct this if it's a misimpression, it's not only the politics that we complain about here, the politicians, it's also the media and trying to get a straight story about anything. But the impression that that I've gotten is that there, not only among the young people, but in general in South Africa, there's very, a lot of support for the BDS movement. I mentioned our former president, here, Bishop Tutu in South Africa has called Israel an apartheid state. So how does that affect you? I mean, standing up to the face of the likes of that kind of prominence as an individual and as DEISI, and then also, the youth trip that you bring to Israel. I mean, what an amazing thing to be able to do. How does it affect recruitment? How do you find the teens to go on that trip? It seems like maybe it would be swimming upstream a little bit.
Yeah. Well, it's not popular. Let's put it that way. It's not popular at all. I mean, You have people that love you, you have people that hate you. I've been called a sellout. My family's been called a sellout. But here's the awesome thing again, and I do need to honor my parents. They've brought us up, my siblings and I, to desire truth irrespective. So there's certain values that have been instilled in us to say this is the right thing to do. And if one day history judges you, you want to be on the right side of history. So it doesn't matter who says what today. If that is the right thing to do, you do it. And if I could take an ad break, so when I have conversations with my brother and we're talking about a particular topic and then we divert to something else, he's like, ad break, so let me do an ad break. And the ad break is this. As parents, you have the opportunity to influence your children with regards to values and truths, with regards to systems and beliefs that will enable them to do what they need to do when they grow up. One of the proverbs is train up a child in the way that he should go so that when he's older he won't depart from it. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if it weren't for my parents. I can tell you that now. When it gets tough, go home, you think about quitting. I mean, I just think about the conversations that I'm going to have with my family. And they're going to be like, what? You quit? You gave up? You're not a Mishwed. Mishweds don't do that. So the opportunities that you have to tell your children to stand up for what they believe in, to stand up for what is right, crucially important. That's something that's helped me. We've become lazy as a society. And I even see that in South Africa, and unfortunately more and more so amongst the young people. So when you're presented with something, particularly from the media, you don't do anything but swallow it up. Like a sponge, you just absorb it. And you don't interrogate it. Is it true? Is it not true? How accurate is it? And part of why the BDS has been as successful as they have been is because people just swallow this up. They don't interrogate. They don't apply common sense. They don't investigate more and say, all right, but that's a bit odd. I mean, if Israel and the Jews have contributed so much, not only to the United States of America, but to the entire world, why would they be doing this? Let's maybe find out if there's more to it. So what we also do in terms of not only presenting people with facts is to help them understand and know that you have to dig deeper. During Operation Protective Edge in South Africa, 10 of the most popular pictures that were used by our media, 9 of them were false, not true. There were stills from horror movies. There were pictures from Syria, wars in Syria, and it's disgusting. But for whatever sensationalist desires perhaps the media wants to accomplish and achieve, that's what it does. So how do we dig deeper? And when you're in a community, when people work together, and that's the power not only of what the CRC has been able to do today, but with the Federation and the work that you do, there's strength in numbers and there's power when people come together. So even though we get vilified and even though it's unpopular, when we come together and we're a community, it's like a pack of lions. When you're together, nobody can really touch you. And so we also encourage our people to come together and to draw strength from each other. Courage is contagious. All it takes is 1 or 2 people to stand up and to say something. And more people draw strength from that. So if I can be a part of helping people become courageous and be a part, hopefully, of a match that's going to light a fire of that, then even the more so to do it. Lastly, I can't necessarily tell you why, unfortunately, people like who we respect and we appreciate and we acknowledge the role that he played in the liberation of South Africa, why somebody like Bishop Desmond Tutu will do what he does. But you see, in South Africa, the young people, they love, appreciate, respect him, but they're looking for a different voice. A voice that's more relevant to them, a voice that they can relate to, which is all the more why we who know the truth have to speak up and have to speak louder. One of the young people that I was speaking to at one of the meetings over the last couple of days was like, but they seem so many, the BDS seems to be so many. I was like, no, they're not, they're in the minority. But you see, the problem is that they're so loud. So we have a responsibility to be louder. And we have a responsibility to hit them on the head. And I have to tell you the story. The South Africans will appreciate it. So in South Africa about 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, they started to erect what we call gantries over our highways because they wanted to toll the highways. And South Africa was up in arms because of how the process had been rolled out, and it was unfair, and there was corruption issues, and wada. So there was pretty much like a civil disobedience that rose up that we hadn't seen in our country. People were like, we are not paying these tolls. It's just not going to happen.
Sound familiar? We have some toll issues here
Okay.
at Hampton Roads.
So let's see if your story ends the way that ours did or is still going on. So for a long time, South Africa was united, black and white. We're not paying this. It doesn't matter. They say that we're going to go to jail. Who cares? It's not going to happen. The government applies pressure, and there's ads on the radio, and there's ads on TV, and there's threatening. If you don't do this, this is going to happen. And then what started to happen was that more and more white people started to say, we'll pay. Like, it's okay, we'll do it. And I'll never forget, there was a black gentleman. And you see, in South Africa, we still are black and white, and so that's why I talk the way that I do. There was a black gentleman who called the radio station. He was like, listen here. We as black people understand the struggle. We understand what it's like not to back down. So please do us a favor. If you're too scared to do this, get behind us. Support us. We'll go up in front and we'll continue. But don't back down. And so the same conversation, even with regards to Israel and the work that's there. Yeah. The likes of me, that's a loudmouth. If you want to put us up in the front, but you're behind supporting in whatever way, research or whatever way they may be, we all have different roles that we can play. It's like a hand. Every finger, different size, different role, but we come together, we can do so much more. I don't even know why I said all of that, but I hope it was useful to somebody. I can't remember what the question was.
I'll paraphrase the message as, stand up.
There we go.
Speak out, and if
you're not the
don't
voice piece, if you're not the mouthpiece, let somebody else be, but do something.
Yeah. The only thing that disturbs me, I agree with you that knowledge is power, and if we can just share the truth, that a lot of progress could be made. If we share the truth, this whole BDS thing wouldn't have legs. So we wonder, why does it seem to be growing such legs? And one reason that many of us come up with is we think that at least there's a lot of latent anti-Semitism. That people are using anti-Israel rhetoric as an excuse for anti-Semitism. And there's a lot of ignorance. The problem is, and I don't know if you can address this. This might be an unfair question, but I'm curious about your reaction. And I mentioned this in Shul on Saturday because we were talking about when Elijah challenges the prophets of Baal, and God literally rains fire down to consume this, sacrifice, and all the people are supposed to turn to God because it was proof right in front of their faces, right, that God is real, that the God of Israel is real. But what happens? The people forget almost immediately. All of Elijah's, disciples are wiped out, and he ends up fleeing. And so what I said is, sometimes you can put the truth, the proof, right in front of people, and they're still going to believe whatever they want to believe. Something we are getting an abject lesson in this country right now. And I think the same applies to BDS. That there are people who even nothing short of bringing people to Israel, which I think is brilliant, but unfortunately, limited.
Sure.
How can we really get people to stop and actually go beyond what they just want to believe and to see truth? It's a real challenge. It sounds like in South Africa as well.
So two things. One of them is a lesson that we've learned. You have the bell curve. And if one uses the analogy of a bell curve, is that on the sides, you're always going to have the extremists. You're going to have people that are totally sold out to your cause. And you're going to have people that it doesn't matter how much you preach to, they're not going to change their minds. So what we've found is that we ignore these guys and focus on the people in the middle. And sometimes the people in the middle need more than one conversation, because remember, they've been hearing this for a long time. It's also at times embarrassing for a person that has been so passionate about something to have to realize I've made a mistake. And so to be patient with them in that journey of realization, which means that one conversation is not necessarily going to be enough. A second conversation is not necessarily going to be enough. 3, 4, 5 times, but we've got to continue at it. That's the first thing.
Sounds like you could be an Israeli. They tend to have that kind of tenacity.
Right? You've got to. The second one, and perhaps it may work in the United States, but it definitely works in South Africa, is sometimes just speaking about Israel is not good enough in the sense of you're not going to get the response or the reaction that you want. So what we do is we speak to an issue that is important to the audience that we are addressing. Be that audience a number of people, or be that audience a single person. By way of an example, in South Africa, unfortunately, we've got a very high unemployment rate, 40% unemployment. Yes, and 70% of that unemployment is young people. So we have young people that go and they study and they get their degrees and then they go into the workplace and there's no jobs. And how can this be in this country where we were promised a better life for all in 1994? So there's a frustration. And because government just isn't fulfilling its promise of creating jobs, people are just, they're restless. In fact, I was speaking to one of the gentlemen about the importance of getting your young people involved in the community and in community work, because they possess an energy that not only you don't have, but an energy that, if channeled correctly, can be absolutely amazing. Who started the Arab Spring? It was young people. There was a time in our history during apartheid where things sort of came to a stalemate. 1976, young people. So they possess an energy that can really, really move things. If channeled positively in the right direction, can be brilliant. If it goes to the wrong side, it's destructive. So you've got this unrestlessness with these young people, and the conversation then that we'll have is like, guys, we've got to find a solution. We can't just sit in this particular place. So let's brainstorm. Let's think about where in the world we can learn how people who may not have had equal opportunities are actually doing something, starting something from scratch. And it doesn't take too long before we introduce the fact that, like, you know what, there's this nation that's called the Startup Nation of the World. Okay. Startup Nation of the World means that these youngsters, and just generally, they are creating businesses left, right, and center. So how can we learn from them to say that you don't have to, if you want to earn a living, have to be employed by somebody? You can create your own job. And so then they have a connection with this nation that happens to be called Israel, that's able to teach them something as to how they can improve their livelihood. Something else, another example, we have, to a greater or larger extent, depending where in the country you're looking, issues of agriculture and people not being able to feed themselves, and poverty, and. So the ability to grow your own crops and do so when you don't have a lot of access to water, which is what in some places we have in our country, not only because of the drought that we're experiencing, but just really because of access to water as a result of where we come from. So hey guys, this is technology. It's considered the best in the world, and it's called drip irrigation. And this is the way that drip irrigation works. They're like, oh, fantastic. And so what this drip irrigation does is that it helps to change their lives. And oh, by the way, drip irrigation comes from Israel. Oh, fantastic. So now, then when the BDS says to the young people to say that you must boycott this nation that's actually teaching you and giving you the skills to grow your own business and lift you out of poverty, they're like, so you want us to turn our backs on the people that are helping us? When you tell them that this drip irrigation technology comes from Israel, and as a result of that, they're able to feed their families, they're able to sell what they produce, and again, so make a better living for themselves. And now you're wanting them to ignore and hate the people that are changing their lives. It's a case of actually no. And why is that? Because you've made a connection with the awesomeness that is Israel with regards to changing people's lives. The politics comes later. And we found that that ability to connect, and there you also don't have to take people to Israel necessarily. You bring Israel to where they are.
Are those partnerships happening? Are there partnerships like that happening?
They are. Unfortunately, they aren't able to happen as quickly as we'd like to, because the doorkeeper in many instances to those partnerships is our government. And our government at the moment isn't a government that recognizes Israel's role from a positive perspective that it can play in our country. But we're working on that. Yeah.
Gotta admire your optimism.
One of the important things is not only understanding Israel and her systems and what happens there, but also what apartheid was. So here we had, during apartheid, by law, you couldn't integrate, couldn't be. You got arrested, you got into trouble. In Israel, that's not necessary. Well, that isn't the case, not even the case of necessary. That's not the case. Currently in South Africa, even though apartheid has come to an end, and yes, part of it is legacy, but also there are some examples in many countries across the world where, because we identify with each other and we share the same faith, or we share the same similarities of religions, we just happen to live together. That doesn't mean that there's apartheid there. One thing that's also interesting is You have Hebrew schools, and anybody that can speak Hebrew goes to that school. If you can't speak Hebrew, how are you going to learn? So you don't go to a Hebrew school. In South Africa, we have Zulu schools, we have Sotho schools. If you can go, go. But if you can't speak the language, you're not going to go to that school. That doesn't mean that there's segregation and that's apartheid. So it's actually understanding part of the reasons as to why there are communities that may exist on their own. And sometimes it is just because the climate is not right and interracial relations haven't been to a place where that's encouraged. But to say that as a result of that, it's apartheid, that's just misinformed.
Thanks. But what can we do to help you in what you do?
There's a number of things, but allow me to speak to 3 of them. The first one is please be. What do I mean by that? DEISI stands for Defend, Embrace, Invest in, and Support Israel. And some communities that we go to, I see Jews not wanting to exist themselves. And we're like, okay, but if you don't want to exist, what's the point in us doing what we do? B also means to be proud, even though at times it may be difficult, and to pass this message on, please, to your young people. To get engaged in the conversation as well, so that when we say that we are standing by, that we are supporting, that there is a Jewish person or there's an Israeli to stand by or stand next to. So it's not a case of we're standing with them and then you're like, okay, we're by ourselves. Where are they? So to be engaged, to be involved, and to continue to be. If nobody's told you, we love and we appreciate you, and you need to continue to be. The second thing is, again, in South Africa, one of the things that I've learned is that it's both an incredible thing, but at the same time, it doesn't always allow us, we find, to do what we do quite easily. And that is to allow us to come into your community, not to try and convert you. You know, some people might, but that's not what we're about. But to learn more of who you are and what you're about, so that we can be better informed and have a better understanding about who the Jewish people are. It's one thing to have an understanding about the Israeli state, but who the Jewish people are. So let us come and help you, and thank you for platforms like this where we can come and speak with and engage with you and allow us to do the same. So a level of integration with regards to what you are doing and what we're doing and contributing to the cause together. And then thirdly, specifically, DEISI is a not-for-profit organization. I mean, there's no ways that I'm not then going to ask it. Is both from resources and finances and opportunities such like this, to recognize a role that hopefully we can continue to play better, to educate more, to take people more, and to so help out in that way, in any way that you can. So those top 3, if I can say them again: be. Allow us to learn more of you and to get involved in what you do, and also to come and be involved in what we do. And then also to contribute where you can from a resources and finance and funding perspective. And also platforms such as this, more of them.
Thank you. Well, how old were you the first time you went to Israel, and what were your first impressions?
I'm revealing my age, which is okay. I went in 2000, I think I went in 2005, 2006. I must have been about 26, 27, somewhere around there. And it was a religious trip. And so for me, the Bible came alive. I'd read of the Sea of Galilee, and you read of Jerusalem and all these things, and I was like, wow, like this is real. And so that was absolutely amazing. I've been to Israel 3 times. I'm going to go on my 4th trip in about 2 weeks. The US used to be my second home. I went to Israel, I got bumped down to number 3. South Africa's home, so it's number 1, and then Israel number 2, and the US number 3. So it's a special place. Hummus, fabulous. When we took our young people to Israel, again, the South Africans will identify, we love meat. Okay, so South Africans love meat, and more particularly black South Africans love meat. We will have protein, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So imagine you take young people, and particularly young boys, and they go to Israel, and the first night at breakfast, they're like, this is interesting. Why? Because it's salads, and it's cheese, and that's not South African breakfast. And then the second morning they see this, and then the third morning they call me Ollie. They're like, Ollie, like, what is this? I was like, guys, different culture, different place. They do things differently. So that was a little bit of a shock to the system. But yeah, so I look forward to many more trips there.
That's wonderful. Next question was, do you believe that if 2 states did come into being, that BDS would come to an end?
No.
Why not?
I don't. BDS have got a particular mandate, and the solution to the BDS's mandate is not a 2-state solution. The 2-state solution may very well be a solution to other challenges, but not to the BDS. If you look at the founding fathers of BDS, and if you look to organizations that support the BDS, such as Hamas, and even what the founding fathers themselves have said, and in fact, if you look at the founding documents of BDS, what is BDS' ultimate goal? Absolutely, for the entire destruction of Israel.
1 state, and it's not a Jewish one.
And it's not a Jewish state.
Right. Okay, one more, a quibble with your analogy. So when we talked about the fence, the security fence, which was sometimes referred to, I guess, in South Africa as the Apartheid Wall, or by BDS folks. So you made the comparison that a Palestinian trying to cross into Israel would be similar like a Mexican citizen or any foreign citizen trying to cross into America, right? You need a checkpoint, you need a passport, that's just how it works. Question is, isn't it sort of a false comparison because the West Bank is not its own country and hasn't been so for 50 years? I would actually amend the question for correctness and say, and has never been its own country, it's part of Jordan.
Well, isn't that exactly it? So it's a disputed territory, and being disputed, if you're not part of something, you're not part of it. So it's not recognized, even by the people themselves, as being part of Israel.
Right.
So if you want to go into something that's not part of you, there's going to be different rules and regulations that may apply. And what's interesting, and if I can share this as well, is the checkpoint doesn't necessarily mean, again, I'm still learning, but from what I understand and what I've learned is that the checkpoint doesn't necessarily mean that you won't be allowed to go in. There's checks that are taken, and if you've got the right documentation and from a security perspective, it's okay, then you go. Which is very different to what happened with us when we went into Bethlehem and when we had our Jewish tour guide, who despite the fact that he was no security risk at all, despite the fact that he had all of his papers, he could not go into Bethlehem. And the young people were like, but hang on, we left our tour guide in Israel, and not because he didn't have his papers, but because he was Israeli, because he was a Jew. So Palestinians, you've got everything that you need and you're not a security threat and you've got your papers, you can go. You're Jewish, you're Israeli, you can't go. And that's something that the world also needs to start to recognize and be honest about, that there's a double standardness that applies there that is wrong. And in fact, if I can use that more to say that that would be more of apartheid than the other way around.
And
let me also just clarify it a little bit. So in terms of West Bank and Israel, or the disputed territories in the state of Israel that's undisputed, if I can use that, we're talking about different territories. So in South Africa during apartheid, it was the same territory, it was the same country. You just, in terms of movement within that entire country, we were still South Africa. All right, there wasn't disputed territories within South Africa. Our movement within the same territory as black people was restricted. It really was like from one community to another.
were black people citizens of the country? Were they considered citizens of South Africa?
We were considered citizens
so that's a difference
with no
right
rights. With no rights.
No, of course. But I mean, it's different in that the residents of the West Bank do not consider themselves citizens of Israel.
Except they want to use the shekel,
right.
And they want to use everything else that belongs to Israel, but still not have anything to do with Israel. Another story for another day.
Right. I'm going to paraphrase. It must be really nice to come here and speak to a very friendly crowd who already really, believes in everything you do. Is just grateful that you're here. But have you had the opportunity while you're on this trip in the USA to speak to a more general audience and to spread the word beyond those of us who, most of us here, I assume, already are sort of, are on the side of anti-BDS?
So not in the US, not on this particular trip. But again, it's not because I'm afraid of that. We do it all the time in South Africa. That's university. That's where the action is, and we do it, and we go there. In fact, I was at CBN earlier today, and I challenged the Christians with regards to their love for Israel and their conversation with Israel. One of the things that we say to each other is that we're the salt of the earth and we're the light of the world. I was like, so what? Light is going to hang out with light? What are you doing just having the conversations with each other? And salt's going to hang out with salt. What are you doing apart from making each other saltier? Go out there where there needs to be light and darkness and salt with regards to people and situations that need salt. So we are very much about going out and speaking and engaging with people who aren't sharing the same views as us. But the way that I came on this particular trip was as an invitation by the Federation. And so if you know of people who are not as friendly, who need to hear, let us know, hook us up, and we're there.
Thank you. On Sunday, Olga spoke with our BBYO kids, about 25 teens, a very friendly audience, very passionate about Israel, thanks to the good work that BBYO does, and their families and synagogues and all that good stuff. Then went and spoke at Green Run High School to a different kind of group of teens. And he was asking how was that different, and if you sensed a difference with that.
Okay, so in summary, speaking to the Jewish young people was to affirm the fact that they've got nothing to be ashamed about with regards to their Judaism and their history, and the fact that they need to stand up and love who they are and stand up for what they believe in, and along those lines, and challenge them also to action, to not just be concerned about social media and the latest label and this and whatever. Get out there. This is your war as well. To a more diverse and particularly a non-Jewish audience is to not be lazy, to investigate the truth, to get an understanding, to have a broader context and a broader perspective with regards to world events, just generally. I told him by way of an example, thank God it didn't happen on this trip, but as recent as about 2-3 years ago, you arrive at the airport and they see that you're a black South African and they ask you a question. So, did you buy those clothes here in America or do you wear clothes at home?
God.
Right? And yeah, exactly. So, encouraging them and saying, guys, so we had some fun with regards to stereotype. And I asked them, tell me some stereotype about Africa. And I'll tell you some stereotype about America. And the stereotype is because of lack of understanding and education, and we're lazy, and we just don't want to do much apart from take selfies and all of those things. So it was on that level that I was engaging with them and encouraging them to say, guys, there's more to what's going on, and you need to understand and appreciate that there is a battle for truth. There's a battle for history. There's a battle for our futures and where we're going to be going. Lots of things are wanting us. Terrorism, poverty, global warming. And without knowledge and education and a broad understanding of what's really going on, we're going to be ineffective to address any of those issues, including the issue of Israel.
Well, I cannot express my gratitude. I think, speaking for many here, our gratitude for you being in the battle with us. And it's a source of great pride for you to be here tonight. I hope you'll join me in thanking Olga for being here.